Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Mid-Level Adventurers, a podcast where non-experts talk about the things they love. I'm Jarrod and with me, as always, for this first series is Matt Morris.
Hi, this is Matt.
And in this first series, we are dedicating the discussion to Dungeons & Dragons. But before we get into that, Matt, did you hear that great new theme music that we have?
I did. It was excellent. Where did you find that?
Yeah, it was made for us by a friend of the show and sound designer, John D. Ivy. You can find more of his work online at soundcloud.com/John D. Ivy.
Nice. I like me a sound designer. I'll have to keep that in mind if, we ever get back into some theater work.
He's been a great friend of mine for a long time. And he said, yeah, I can whip up something for you. So now we have some great intro and outro.
That's perfect. Well, tell him I said thank you.
Of course, absolutely.
And that it sounds awesome. Also, speaking of sound things, I hopefully have fixed the audio issue I had for the first two episodes, which was terrible mic quality. I didn't even realize it at the time. Just didn't have the mic connected, evidently, when we did it last time. So shame on me, but hopefully it sounds much better and my volume will be better.
Yeah, I think you can be forgiven.
We're not experts. It was our first time.
Since we're not experts, podcasting is one of those things we're not experts at.
It's true. It'll get better, and that's okay.
Yes. Shall we dive into today's topic of D&D?
Let's do it.
Great. So for those of you who are unaware, D&D is a game where players create characters that they use to interact with the world of the game. These characters have certain abilities, stats, characteristics, all of which are decided by a combination of the player, consulting with the Dungeon Master or DM, and rolling some dice. The player drives all the choices that their character makes, and the DM decides how those choices affect the game world by consulting these omnipresent dice. Last time we talked about some of the first games we played, and we mentioned a few of our characters. This session we're going to be talking about those characters in a little more detail, our approaches to building characters, some of the technical elements involved in that, and how we feel about backstories in general. We kind of talked about some of the favorite player characters that we have made in the past, but do you have any favorites that stand out to you?
Yes, actually, I don't have many fully fleshed out characters in my history. There have been a couple of some one-shot characters that I created and played once or twice that I actually really like and would like to maybe come back to one day. One in particular is our first one-shot, which I created a half-elk. That's a strange race. A half-elf. Rogue, and that was really fun to play. His backstory was maybe a little loose and perhaps would have got fleshed out if we had continued that particular story, but it was a little cliche, I guess, for a rogue. Grew up in the streets, didn't have any parents, that kind of thing. Yeah, he sort of weaseled his way into the high life and was an incognito thief and trading as a bit of a diplomat, and it was just fun. It's fun to play a charismatic character. How about you? You got one that sticks out immediately?
I have a few, actually, that I really enjoyed. I'm going to not include some NPCs that I've talked about previously, but actual characters that I've played. There was Gothric, who really had no backstory whatsoever. He was just the first character I ever built, but he was fun to play because I decided he was going to be a bit of a jerk, and I got extra XP for that. So that was kind of fun for me.
Know your DM.
Yeah, exactly.
Cater to your DM.
Yeah. I did, however, really enjoy Chevron and Vladimir, two characters I mentioned on the previous podcast. Chevron was a rogue. His backstory was he was from a noble family, but he was the third son, and as such, tradition in their family was the third child got named after the family insignia, so there was like a long history of Chevrons, kind of like the family building up its rep by adding more rank or whatever. And he really didn't want anything to do with the family, so he decided that he would steal a horse and run off on his own. And that was where he came from.
Nice.
And Vladimir, don't remember too much of a backstory for him beyond whatever my favorite enemy was, killed my parents, and so that made me angry. And
oh, well, yeah.
So that's why I became, which is a bit of a trope. But I think one of my favorites is actually the gnome I'm playing now in a Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign. I am playing a gnome fighter who uses a longsword as a greatsword.
I love this character, by the way.
Oh, yeah. He's a 3'4" gnome, 3'8" if you include the mohawk, and he was going to be a lapidary like the rest of his family, but then some feral hogs invaded his home, and the gnomes were like, oh my god, I run. But he stood up and mounted a defense with some other people's and kind of like led the charge against them. And so the great hog wars ended, and he was a hero and victor. So he realized he was pretty good at fighting and had a fun time with it. So he went off to train a little bit more and spent some time in an army in the Southlands of Faerun, and eventually, receiving a letter from someone he had trained at one point, decided to go up to Waterdeep. And that's his backstory in that campaign.
That's how we joined up. It leads me to the characters that I'm currently playing, which I really am enjoying. The one in our campaign that started as a module, one of the was it one of the free made available modules that actually I think was it Matt Mercer had published.
Correct. It is the Frozen Sick adventure from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, which is one of the resource books available from Dungeons and Dragons.
That's right.
Created and written by Matt Mercer, who's the DM for Critical Role. It's based in his world of Exandria. Wildmount is a continent on Exandria.
That's true. Yeah, I like that one a lot. And I think maybe, and I'm biased, I suppose, because it's a character I'm currently playing, but I think I like his sort of backstory and his personality the most so far.
He's a lot of fun. Why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah. He's a Furbolg druid. And for that, I had to do a little bit of research because I wasn't very familiar with that race or that class. So it was a first time for both. Furbolgs live isolated, but in their own little clan. And this guy, as he trained to be a druid, Finfarin actually is his name. We call him Finn for short. He sort of just, wandered out into the forest, sort of drifted further and further from his Furbolg folk to become closer to nature. He has an affinity for animals, especially. And, he became incredibly socially awkward because of it. He hasn't really seen any other races until he joined up with the party. Certainly not really talked to any other races. He hasn't probably spoken much at all other than to the animals and the plants in the forest. So that's been fun to play. That whole awkward loner, backstory that he's learning about everything really for the first time. He's seeing so many things for the first time. Whereas with another character I'm playing, for instance, a fighter in another 5e campaign, he's seen a lot. So this is very different. This guy's like wide eyes, like everything is kind of new to him, and that's been really fun.
This is Fen that's wide-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Yes, Finn, not the fighter. Fighter's grizzled. He's seen some things. He was a soldier.
Been there, done that.
Which is fun too. Yeah, don't get me wrong. That's fun too. But that character was very much like I just need something to get in and go in and I have a backstory, sure. But it was a little more tropey, I guess. Fighter, he was a soldier, etc.
Very cool.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, not at all. Which brings up an interesting question. What are some things that you think about when you create a character? And are there any kind of tropes or anything that you really are into or that you think people should shy away from? Or not necessarily that they should?
Yeah, I think inevitably the first couple of characters you make, you're going to stray into some well-used tropey territory. It's just going to happen. I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
No, not at all.
Yeah, like it happens. I like personally to use other fictional characters sometimes as inspiration. Maybe not as carbon copies of the character, but as, hey, this little bit kind of reminds me of Jarrod from the Witcher Tales.
Yeah.
And this little bit kind of reminds me of, I don't know, Luke Skywalker,
Yeah, absolutely.
So take some things like that as inspiration. Or if there was ever a character in a story you read that maybe isn't so well known, thinking something that may be like a little more indie or something, and you just want to like, oh, I really love this character. I haven't seen anything like it. Maybe I want to bring it to life in my own story. There's nothing wrong with that. So there are definitely some cliches, I guess, that I like knowingly try to avoid. But, what's the phrase? There's nothing new under the sun. I don't think you should get too caught up. You're going to make it unique in your own way just because of your personality bringing something to it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything wrong with using a previously existing fictional or historical character or anything as a base to inspire you. Everybody's inspired by something. Your D&D character should absolutely be inspired by something. I think it's very interesting when people come up with combinations that I would never have thought of.
Yeah.
Because
it's fun to share those.
I mean, I use stuff as inspiration all the time. I am very interested when I hear people come up with this cool idea and I'm like, oh, I would never have thought of that.
I think that all the time. I'm like, why am I not that creative? Why didn't I think to do a gnome fighter that uses a longsword is a great sword?
To be fair, gnome fighters in 5th edition, and pretty much any iteration of Dungeons & Dragons, tend to be very underpowered if you use the racial stats as written, which this kind of leads into a conversation we're going to talk about, how to construct a character. So every character, when you make it, you generate 6 ability scores in one of 3 ways. And these 6 ability scores are strength, how strong you are, constitution, how hardy you are, how healthy you are, your resistance to poison and stuff like that. There's dexterity, which is how nimble you are. There's intelligence, which is how many books you've read. There's wisdom, which is how aware you are of the world around you. And then there's charisma, which is how charming you can be, how persuasive your arguments are. And those 6 ability scores determine a variety of skills that you have. The 3 ways to generate these ability scores are to roll for them randomly, to use the point buy system, or to take the standard array. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally love rolling for stats. Rolling 4d6, so that's 4 6-sided dice, adding the highest 3 together. So your highest possible score would be an 18, because you could roll 3 6s. Or your lowest possible score could be a 3 if you roll 3 1s.
3 1s, yeah.
If you roll a 3, 4, 5, 6, then you would drop the 3 because that's the lowest number, and you would add the 4, 5, 6 together. And that would be an ability score. And you do that 6 times, and then you can assign them as you wish. Some people prefer holdbacks. I believe in older editions, you rolled them in order. Then you would build your character off of that, where I like to do the opposite of that.
Yeah, I like it too. I have heard people mentioning, and I didn't realize that was an older rule, but I have heard of people saying, I like to let the dice decide. I roll, and then if you end up with like a 6 in strength, and you're like, well, I guess he's not a fighter. But I like the way you do it and being able to assign them. It comes up with, like in the case of Finn, who I mentioned, you come up with some interesting flaws, I think. If you have, a quote-unquote bad roll, you put your strengths where they should be, I guess, for whatever class you want to play. And then in Finn's case, I had my lowest score was charisma. It's a bit of a flaw, but it really worked for his backstory and his character. So, we have fun time trying to, anytime he has to roll charisma for anything, it's like, oh, well, I'm going in this with a, disadvantage. And it's been fun.
Yeah, and I love it when people play into that weak stat, whether it's charisma or strength or dexterity. If you have a low dexterity, you could be really freaking clumsy. Or if you have a low intelligence, you could not know how to read. If you are unwise, you could just be totally oblivious to the rest of the world and not really care about what's going on around you. And each of these ability scores can be played up or down in a variety of ways, and it makes it a lot of fun. But so that's dice rolling. Standard array, you have set ability scores of 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8, and you arrange them however you want. And then point buy is where you have 27 points to spend on your ability scores, and they all start at 8. So if you leave it at 8, it costs you 0. But every time you go to an integer above 8, it costs an additional point. So if you were going to go from 8 to 9, that would cost you 1 point out of the 27. If you were going to go from 8 to 10, it would cost you 2. 11 would be 3 points from the 27, and so on and so forth, until you spend all your points and have your stats. It's an interesting way to do it. Sometimes rolling can be very detrimental, and you can roll really horrible stats, and your DM won't let you re-roll. Personally, if someone rolls like a horrible array, I'm like, just re-roll the whole thing.
The whole thing. And then makes sense.
They can even be overpowered arrays. If you roll 4 18s, I'm going to be like, look, that's really cool, but that's way too much. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not quite natural.
2 is okay, but 3 or 4, like I just can't. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's fair.
If you rolled 10s on everything and then had 2 18s, I could get behind that. Although I prefer if you had like an 8 or a 6 on something else, because that's just fun to play.
It is. Yeah, we talked about that when I rolled the stats for Finn. At first you think, oh, it's a bad roll, but find a way to use it. What would make sense for your character based on the backstory you have? And, like maybe there's no set way to do this. Sometimes you do start with a dice. Maybe you get a character and you're like, well, he's terrible dexterity. Maybe he's really clumsy. So maybe it was a thing that he always had, and that leads into your backstory. I like it. I have also used the point buy for a character I'm currently playing in a Pathfinder campaign. And for Pathfinder, I think it makes a little more sense. Pathfinder can be a little more min-maxy, which, if you're not familiar with the term, in short, is just people that are trying to make, I guess, mathematically or by the numbers, the strongest character. It starts to affect your choices more so than your backstory might, if that makes sense.
Right.
If I'm saying that correctly. And for this game, we use the point buy system because, you get a little more technical with how you want to shape your character if you're thinking about the long game when they get to level 15 or whatever. I think for any 5e game, I would prefer the roll.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it just kind of gives into that sense of random chaos because we're not all good at everything. We are all weak at something, and it's kind of fun to have that conveyed into the characters that we create. The next part, of course, of making a character is racial ability scores, and this has come under a lot of fire lately, and there's been a big discussion about it. But racial ability scores are based on the species you choose to play in the game. So if your character is a human, your 2 options are you can get a +1 to everything, or you can add a +2 to one of your choice, I think, or you can also take a feat.
Yeah, I think so.
Elves have a +2 to their dexterity, and then depending on the type of elf, there's like a +1 to wisdom or a +1 to charisma. It's a lot of different modifiers that you can add on based on your heritage. So if I did that, playing a gnome fighter would not be an optimal choice. But what we decided to do was we used a method on D&D Beyond. I believe James Hake was the individual who came up with it. It pulls from class and background, the ability score modifiers. So you ignore the racial ones and use it based on your class, which makes a lot more sense to me. There's a great 5e module that a freelance designer named Gabriel Hicks has created. You can find him online on Twitter at Gabe James Games. He has created something called the Class Modifier module, and it's a narrative-driven character creation tool for ability score increases based on class instead of on race. It is on itch.io. You can find it there, and it is really great. You can download it for free, but I would highly recommend throwing a few bucks his way because it is so good. In our upcoming campaign that we're going to start in a little bit here, I want to use this resource because I think it is much happier and much more better.
Yeah, I would love to try it. I think it's great to have the choice. 'Cause I imagine not everyone's going to move away from, people are going to, I want to play an orc because he has these racial abilities. But
And you can absolutely still do that. It's just another option. Like, you don't have to use it. The DM may allow it, the DM may not allow it. I personally think it's a really great narrative tool because it makes it so you don't have to worry about, I want to be a half-orc, but they're not the best wizards statistically, so...
I think it's great. I'm looking forward to trying it. It's something that I saw even in, I think I mentioned it the other week, playing a lot of the Elder Scrolls games like Morrowind growing up. And at first that was a thing that you were like, I want to be a thief, but I want to be an orc too. And they moved away in some of the later games from, I guess they made it a little more, friendly. You can level up in a way that like an orc could be a thief as long as you level your sneaky too. And I like that. I think it's cool. It opens the options up. So you're not getting the same old, every time I play this, I have to be this.
Right, yeah. Like, I'm going to play a rogue, but my best option is a halfling, so I'm going to be another halfling rogue. No, be a dragonborn rogue. Just go for it,
Or use those things like as an interesting, I don't want to say disadvantage, but if you wanted to go with the racial abilities, be like, oh man, this dragonborn, he's going to be a terrible rogue based on the fact that he's a dragonborn. But he's going to do it. He's going to have penalties.
Absolutely. You can totally do that too, and I'm all about it. Like, it's your character, have fun with it. That's really the point of all this, I guess, is it's your character, have fun with it. Talk to your DM or your GM if you have any kind of questions or concerns. They might be able to help you when you create new characters, so... Speaking of 5e and character creation, backstory. 5e has this idea of backgrounds that includes like ideals, flaws, things like soldier, acolyte, and they come with social bonuses. They gave you like maybe an additional language or a skill or a tool set or something like that. How do you feel about those? Do you find those helpful? Do you kind of wish there were more options or different options? There's certainly a lot of homebrew options that people have created online in a variety of formats. How do you like those? Do you think they help? Or do you think they kind of hinder you in any way?
No, I think they help. I think they're great. I mean, what you're going to have access to for free, I should say, in quotations. For instance, if you use, and I think it's a powerful tool, D&D Beyond, it helps take you through. I mean, maybe we'll talk about this more later. It takes you through kind of step by step, and those suggestions are recommended to choose. And they might be a little limited if you're just doing free vanilla D&D Beyond. But they're, like you said, there are other resources, homebrew. But I think they're great. They give you a thing to think about. I think as long as you don't feel like they're sort of tying you down to anything specific, but it is nice to be like, oh man, it would be nice to be a soldier. And if I'm that, then I might get this extra feat or skill that I didn't even think about or wouldn't have access to. And if you want to change it or modify it, then speak with your DM. Maybe they've got an idea how you can like tweak it to better suit. If you're like, this vanilla soldier doesn't quite, I want him to be like this. Yeah, maybe there's something like that the DM knows about or can help you modify it to fit with the game. They're going to be more in tune with the game and the story as a whole, and they're going to want to incorporate your character's backstory into that.
And I think that's a very important point to make, that if you find something that's almost what you want or has the kind of flavor, you can edit it. Nothing is set in stone, and it's just a matter of balancing. Even if you have never designed anything in your life and you're like, hey, I really like this idea. Can I do something like this? Talk with your GM about it. Work it out. And a special little segment we like to do here on Mid-Level Adventurers is the Tavern Corner. What are you imbibing this week, dear Matt?
Tonight, I'm imbibing a little IPA, a double IPA. It's not little, from a brewery out of Atlanta. I don't know where they are specifically. People from Georgia will say, well, that's very vague. It is. It's called Orpheus Brewing, and I like them a lot. They do fantastic IPAs, and they also do fantastic sours. Jarrod, drinking that sour last podcast, reminded me that I would need to find some of their sours for him to try. All of their beers are named after like bits of Greek mythology. The one I'm drinking tonight is called Transmigration of Souls.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, and on the can, their little tagline on the can is "Don't look back." So it's delicious. It's a very like floral, fruity kind of double IPA. It's very easy drinking. What do you got, Jared? What are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a Tripel.
Ooh, Belgian beer. Another one.
Yes, it's a Belgian-style golden ale from Allagash, out of Portland, Maine.
Allagash does great Belgian beers.
Yeah, it is very refreshing, and I was just in the mood for more of an ale and something crisp and easy to go down, and this really is very pleasing. There are these notes of passion fruit and honey. It's exceptional, and everything that they do is in just a single brewery that they opened in like '95.
Yeah.
But it is fantastic.
I find their tripels, quadruples, doubles even very complex, and I like that. Like the more you drink it, the more you get different flavors. It's fun.
Yeah, the only complaint I have about it is it comes in a 4-pack and not a 6-pack.
Yeah, and it probably costs as much as a 6-pack.
It did, but worth it.
Yeah, I think it's worth it. I think it's a mark of a quality beer.
I do not mind paying for quality beer.
Exactly. Nor do I. I think that's a very fitting beer for the tavern corner, whereas an American style IPA is a little less, a little further from D&D.
Maybe, but American style IPAs are totally legit. People love them. It's not really my go-to, but that's okay. I am in the minority in that, and I'm fully aware of it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a thing, but it's for me, it's a good summer beer too. I'll probably have a heavier one our next quest.
Fair enough. I really like this Tripel.
I gotta find it.
It is tasty. I'm not sure where I'll end up on the next one. Maybe next time I'll just have something totally different. I don't know. It'll be fun to see where we end up. I do wish you could like mix and match, because I admit that I'm one of those people who I don't mind spending money on a beer if I have faith in it. But if it's something new, maybe I don't want to spend $20 on a 6-pack or $15 on a 4-pack.
Yeah, I love the mix and match. It is a nice way to try a bunch of new beer. I hate to do a plug because we're definitely not getting sponsored by them, but there's a place in Brooklyn called Tap Room. You probably saw the ads on Facebook. I tried them out. I gave in, and they let you buy beer by the can or whatever. It's a good place to try little singles and stuff, and they, I think, ship anywhere in the city, anywhere in the boroughs. I mean, there's my plug, I guess, for Tap Room if you're listening.
Cool. Well, that's what we're drinking in the tavern tonight.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. The 5E suggestions for backstory. The idea of ideals, flaws, things that connect you to other party members or that create a weakness or a goal for the characters. They act as suggestions, and I think they're a good idea and very helpful because they're only suggestions. They are not, you must choose one of these 6 options. They are just there to help someone who may not have experience or have a clear idea to kind of give them a jumping off point.
Yeah. Exactly. I know the first time I really used them, I chatted with another party member who was, we were making our character at the same time. And just by using the prompts, we were like, oh, well, what if we did this and maybe our characters were connected in the past in this way. And this is why you have this trait. Sometimes that helps. Or talk with your DM about it. If nothing else, maybe seeing the suggestions. If you don't like them at face value, it just gives you something to spark creativity. Create your own.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely lets you have a jumping off point. You don't find what you like, you can create it. And that's kind of the great thing about the game in general. If something is kind of what you want, but not really, you can probably find either a homebrew source for it or talk to your DM and figure something out. The goal is, I believe, to have fun with the character that you will be playing, because if you're not going to have fun, then what's the point of the game?
Yeah.
When I try to get a group together to start a game, I think about the amount of people who might need some extra guidance and people who have played a time or two. Because I like inviting new people into the game and kind of nurturing an interest in it. The few games that we played together have included new players.
Yeah.
Because I really like showing people how it can be fun. And I'm by no means saying that I am the best dungeon master in the world, because I am not. I make mistakes. I learn stuff all the time. But I think that makes the game more interesting because you're like, that's a good point. Here's how that will affect things from now on. I really look forward to starting new games and new groups and such.
Yeah, I also like as someone who has very recently come back into it and is trying to learn very rapidly in a short amount of time. But I've also seen people that are just starting, where I was just there a little bit ago, and it's nice to see that and see people get it or be able to help if they have questions too. Because it is, the point I think is, trying to work together and have fun together. Like you said, it's not about who's a better player or who played the rogue better. Everyone's going to have a different take on how to approach a character. And sometimes you get some oh, I never thought of that. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Absolutely. And even if you make identical characters, like you can have two rogues in a party, they will be very different by the nature of the game. And
Yeah.
because the people playing them are totally different.
That might be kind of interesting. Interesting story, right? Two competing rogues trying to show off. I don't know. Like the possibilities go from there. You don't have to just say, well, you're a fighter, so there can't be another fighter in the party.
I have never believed in the rule of you can't have two of the same class or whatever. I'm like, no, you can absolutely do it. There are two clerics on Critical Role, and they are very different characters.
Yeah.
Caduceus Clay, played by Taliesin Jaffe, is a very different cleric than Jester, played by Laura Bailey.
And I think the point here too is like, do it if it makes sense if it's something you want to play and it makes sense for the story, then why not? And it can.
Yeah.
Give DM a heads up, I guess. And then they can plan for how to shape that. And I guess it's a two-way street, right? Your DM isn't collecting this information to be like, this is how I'm going to kill the party. They don't have a cleric, so.
I mean, that is mostly how I go with it as a DM. I know there are DMs out there who are out to kill their players' characters, and like meat grinders can be fun too.
Yeah.
And one after another, your characters die, and then you rip up the character sheet when they're done. Like that's got an element of fun to it as well, because it lets you try out new combinations of abilities, classes, feats, features. It's just fun. In a like actual campaign, I do think it is more beneficial to the enjoyment of the group to not try to actively kill the players. If they die, then the characters die, and that's just part of life. Sometimes crap happens.
Yeah.
But using their backstory to create an intriguing plot hook or create an emotional moment or a tense situation, that can be a lot of fun. We just had a game last night, actually, where our rogue was kidnapped by a group of people who had apparently been hired by his evil, insane brother. The party went to the guy's office, and they had figured out by this point that the guy who sent them on this mission was actually the rogue's brother. For months, they haven't known. So they went to search for him, eventually found out where he was living. They busted in through the second floor, and that just happened to be where the highest concentration of bad guys was. And it was a tough battle. People went down multiple times. The evil brother was a paladin of an insane god. And yeah, it was a bad time. He had an ability that could lay waste to an entire swath of people. And they almost didn't make it, but eventually they did. It was a tough battle, and there was a while where a couple players were very frustrated because they were down and they couldn't do anything. They kept getting knocked, but they managed to chip away. The dice weren't with them at first, but ultimately they ended up being successful. And it was a tense situation. And I didn't make that with the idea to kill them. I made that on the idea that, hey, this guy is a tough badass, and he has found followers, and they are dedicated to him, and they've been trained specifically to work for him. I wasn't trying to kill them. I almost did, but I wasn't trying to.
Well, if there wasn't some element of real danger, I guess it would get old after a while. You want to be triumphant, obviously. You don't want your characters to die, but it does need to be a challenge. And I think you don't play to kill them, but you do play, you're role-playing the NPCs just like they're role-playing their characters.
Yeah, because I know so much, like it is very hard to realize there's no way that this character would have prepared for what they've come up with.
Yeah.
So I always try to think of NPCs' tactics, what they would do before the party shows up. Would these be the kind of people who post a guard, or would they be secure in where they are right now?
Yeah.
The brother didn't have like active guards patrolling because he's in a townhouse in a city and nobody suspects his true nature. Why would he post a guard? And he was not expecting them to have realized the connection based on other events that had happened in the past.
Yeah. It does, like you said, the dice weren't with them, and they were, it can make or break some of these encounters. And it is hard, it's tough when you're down and can't do anything. But I think having interesting stories like that, that's what I look for in a campaign. And it does make it maybe harder if you end up dying. You spend a lot of time with the character. But yeah, you're right. There's totally a valid element to maybe just making a character for fun. And, we've kind of done a little bit of that too, right? We've got some what we're calling episodic games where we take this group of characters and sometimes we switch up who's playing them. And there have been some weeks where we have died and we just say, okay, that was, alternate reality. In that case, we died with this group of characters. We'll try again with another scenario, and they're not necessarily always interconnected. And that's fun. It gives me a chance to play things that I haven't played before. Maybe I don't play often. Try some things out.
It is a fun format, and I like doing it. For those who don't know, we're using these Dungeon League adventures to run as little tiny one-shots. Adventurers League is the official fan play league of D&D. They use documentation from Wizards of the Coast, and you can only use certain things, approved content only, so you can potentially have a character with you at all times, and whatever city you're in I think they play on Wednesdays, you can pop around into whatever game shop is hosting the event and use that character as long as it is appropriate for that Adventurers League module. We're just using them to mess around and try new characters, and there's like a pool of 6 or 7 characters, and if one person is playing, they can play them all. If 3 people are playing, they can divvy up however many they want, and it is just a fun kind of experimental bit of gameplay.
Yeah, it invites it's not always the same players every time, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just for fun, it's a very different thing than doing a long haul campaign.
Absolutely. And on that note, have you ever just built characters for fun? Just been like, just to learn how to build a character, or you had an idea and so you just whip one up for fun?
Because of the episodic game, I didn't actually finish it, sadly. But yeah, I just started making, a lot of it was in my mind too, but like, what would be an interesting combination? And I went down a rabbit hole of learning new class traits or, racial features and things. And I have also not necessarily fully fleshed out characters, but just done a lot of reading on things, or people might have a guide up of like how to build fighter. To be fair, some of it is a little, like I mentioned earlier, min-maxy. People that are like, to maximize damage, take these things, don't take these things. I try not to lean too heavy into that because I think you pick things that sound interesting.
Yeah, always be a fighter with a great sword, never be a fighter with a short sword kind of deal.
Yeah. Like I have a fighter in a campaign that's dual wield, and most people that write these things are like, don't do that. It's the worst, for long-term gaming, EPS. And I'm like, whatever. It's fun. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. I have a backup character from one of my campaigns that is a dual wielder rogue/fighter. So
Nice. In this fighter campaign, one of our party members, he does that. He when he makes a character, he kind of has a backup character in his mind. He's like, well, if my character dies, or if something happens that deems it necessary for this character to depart for some reason.
Yeah, because that's another thing. Like, if you get tired of a character, you don't have to play it until that character dies. Just talk with your DM, and you can be like, hey, I would like to retire a character for however long and try a new character.
Yeah.
And the DM will figure out a way to make that work if they're respectful and good. If they're not, then they may tell you to suck it up.
Yeah, and that'd be terrible.
I can't imagine ever telling a player no. It may require a bit of a narrative beat as opposed to just randomly in the middle of a dungeon. Okay, this guy's gone and this guy's in this place.
Right. And you wake up and he's no longer there.
Bill is gone and Sarah is now here.
Yeah.
That wouldn't make sense. I mean,
No.
I guess there are ways you could do it, but I would not run it that way.
Yeah, that does lead me to this next thing. I think we sort of touched on earlier, but we've talked a lot about making characters with interesting backstories. But have we discussed the elements that we think should be in there for a backstory? Like, what do you look for when either you're making a character or trying to help someone make it?
I look for a good idea, and that's kind of a broad stroke answer. But when I say a good idea, I mean a kernel of experience that is a defining moment in that character's pre-existing life. The trope is, goblins murdered my family, so I hate goblins, and it encouraged me to fight goblins or to hunt them down and track them in the woods and become a ranger or a fighter. Or I was born under a certain celestial alignment, and now I have these magical abilities that no one else in my family does, and so I'm a sorcerer. These kinds of things, they don't have to be specific and fully fleshed out when someone presents a character to me as a DM. I just want them to have one cool thing in their pile of ideas and be like, great, that's a fun idea. How would this affect somebody? And how would this build off? What kind of reactions would do that? And I don't make anybody create their entire family tree in their town and da-da-da-da-da. That is way too much. I ask my players for 1 to 2 paragraphs just about their early life, a couple sentences. What was it like? How were you raised? What was the environment? And then what was a big defining moment that happened to you? And what would encourage you to pursue adventurer's lifestyle? Because it's not an easy path. It's just fraught with danger if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because one of the things players don't think about, they're like, oh, I'm only a level 2 fighter. I have, 19 hit points. You got to understand, most people in D&D, your average commoner, has 4.
You're already a demigod at level 2, aren't you?
Yeah, you are tougher than most people ever will be.
Yeah.
So I understand when people get frustrated with, what, he hit me for 15 points of damage? Oh my God. Because, yeah, that would obliterate 5 townsfolk.
Yeah.
But you're still standing. That's impressive. So a little bit of a perspective.
Yeah. I do like, you mentioned earlier, like possible backstory, born under a certain sign. Maybe that's something that makes you unique. There's something that's like, maybe you had a traumatic accident and you should have died and you didn't.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe, maybe there's something different about me.
There is a kind of a joke about D&D. No adventurer ever has a happy home life with both parents alive kind of deal.
Yes.
Always at least one parent has died or their family has all died and they're an orphan. They're all that remains. No adventurer has ever grown up on a farm happily and decided, I'm just going to go become a fighter today, or I'm going to learn magic in wizard school. That never happens. There's always
That would
something
be boring. Yeah, you need an inciting incident.
I believe that, yes, you do need an inciting incident, but I don't think it needs to be tragic and dramatic.
No, you're right.
There are people who do amazing things in our life that did not have a tragedy in their past, but have gone on to create and do amazing and wonderful things.
Yeah.
Not everybody is an Oppenheimer, so.
Right. You don't, this is my perspective, perhaps. I don't think you necessarily need all of the details. And you mentioned that, right? Just like a couple of paragraphs.
You flesh out things as they come up, as they need to.
Yeah. You need something to build off of when you are beginning to have encounters, maybe with other people, or finding things to like relate or talk to with other players, like, oh, I'm also from here. And I happen to also speak Elvish because I grew up in this town. I know I fill up details on the spot sometimes. The game with the fighter that I had, that I may have mentioned this off the podcast, but playing a Dragonborn. And there's a player in the party that's a kobold, which is like a little, to some people, looks like a little dragon. So it's kind of funny that we're together and we've made up this little backstory together. Occasionally people ask us, and I will just make on the spot, one of us are like, oh yeah, well, there was this one time where he was trying to fight a whole, tribe of goblins by himself, and I had to get, and that's kind of fun. We've got the meat and potatoes of the backstory together, and then we can kind of just like improv almost some little like instances that we knew each other.
Yeah.
If you're looking for things that are necessary, that would be maybe just the basics to be a foundation, and then enough things that will guide you to how your character will react to things in the future, I guess. Things that like, did goblins kill his family and he has a hatred of goblins, and so he goes into bloodlust when he sees a goblin? Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe he has a fear of goblins.
Yeah.
And characters grow, right? Interesting ones do. So these things may change.
Yeah, character development is probably the most fun and rewarding.
Yeah.
My gnome fighter had a bit of a character development with the Dampier Barbarian in our Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign.
Oh.
There was a big moment of, look, I get it, you're angry, but if you're going to be part of this team, you can't be fighting the sorcerer all the time. You need to find a better way to be your outlet, or we're going to kick you out.
Yeah.
His character was assigned to us by a faction within the city.
Oh.
We can just be like, no, we're not part of your faction. Get out. We don't have to let you live here. We're just being nice.
Sometimes finding those things that the characters have that are a little bit of a conflict with other characters is interesting, right?
Yeah.
You want to be friends as players. Like,
it is okay for there to be friction between characters as long as it doesn't leak into the real world, as long as it does not develop into something that makes the party fall apart. Friendly competition, a little spat, that's okay.
Yeah.
Player versus player is fun for a few minutes, but then it's like, ugh.
You have to remember there are other people in the room with you too. So it's, it's not just like when your characters may be stealing the show doing something, you've got other people that are wanting to play. I mean, we could go on and on about backstories because really the possibilities are kind of limitless.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a cliche thing, so be it, go for it. If it's inspired by a real world character, go for it.
I agree. Well, I think that will wrap us up for this week. Thank you all for joining us on this adventure. We will be back next week where we talk about a very crucial part of the game, players. Feel free to hit us up on Twitter and or Instagram at Mid-Level Adventure. That's MIDLVL Adventure on both platforms. By all means, tweet us, and do you just tag on Instagram? I'm not even sure, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, you do it, and we'll try to figure out how to respond.
Yeah, it'll be great. And once again, check out John D. Ivy on SoundCloud. He made our wonderful music, and it's pretty dope, I think. Thank you all very much. I'm Jarrod Jehoda.
I'm Matt Morris.
And until then, mind the traps and keep adventuring.